So we'll just start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people. And we'll pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging. Extend that respect to any Indigenous people present here tonight.
So yes, we are recording for everyone in the audience and at home. So just be aware of that. And we are Jade and Bree, and behind the computer is Emily, the three co-directors of the Psych Hive. It's lovely to have you all here. It's lovely to have everyone here from home. And we started the Psych Hive about a year ago because I think we felt like there was a bit of a gap going on, and we wanted to fill that gap by building something super neuro-affirming and make this space where everyone was welcome and there was a space for everybody. We work here from the Psych Hive, and we've got our rooms around the place. And
yeah. And a big part of us starting this was to build a community, and so this seminar series makes up a big part of that, being able to invite people from the community in and online as well. So thank you again for being here. All right, so emotional regulation. And we were just saying, we have to regulate our emotions and the nerves for today. So emotional regulation is such a big topic, right? And I think anybody who has a neurodivergent child or is neurodivergent themselves or has any kind of engagement with psychology has probably come across this topic of emotional regulation before. So I thought that before we start kind of working out how to support with regulation, let's work out actually, well, what does it mean to be emotionally regulated? Because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what is considered to be regulated. And so a lot of you might be, is anyone in the room aware of like the window of tolerance? Have come across that? Yeah, so this is a really popular idea where, you know, kids or anybody, any nervous system kind of operates within this kind of window of what we're comfortable with, right? And then we can go into fight or flight or freeze and shut down when we go outside of our window of tolerance. And that's a really popular way of kind of thinking about emotional regulation. And we go outside our window of tolerance where our safety needs aren't being met or our basic needs aren't being met. But what I wanted to kind of introduce tonight was the next one. Q. Which is this slightly inverted picture of emotional regulation that I think probably better sums up the emotional experience of most people. So this comes from the polyvagal theory, or some other people might call it the autonomic ladder. It's another model for understanding emotional regulation, understanding how our nervous system actually works. And so the idea behind this one is that there's three main states. At the top of the ladder, we have our safe and connected state, which is where we feel really kind of safe in our body, in our environment. We can be really social and engage with other people, and we can meet our needs. But then as we move down the ladder, when we sense danger or something's in our environment's not quite right or a need of ours isn't being met, we move down into fight or flight. But this is kind of like fight or flight is something's wrong and I can do something about it. So it's generally something's wrong and I can be anxious and protect myself, or something's wrong and I can be angry and protect myself. So it's going into that fight or flight. It's still an activated state. When we perceive that we can't do anything about whatever's wrong in our environment or in our body, that's when we go down to the bottom of the ladder, which is this shutdown, disconnect. And that's a really kind of scary place to be for a lot of people. But this shutdown and disconnect is kind of like our body and our brain's way of protecting us in the moment where we feel like we can't get away or we can't protect ourselves. And so we kind of tune off from our body. We stop feeling, we stop engaging. And a lot of parents kind of describe this for kids happening after a big kind of meltdown or a big emotional kind of experience in fight or flight. What I think is really important, and I hope if you can take anything away from today to be this, a healthy nervous system moves through these three states every day, right? And a healthy nervous system will move through these three states based on whatever's going on in the environment. It's not healthy just to stay in one state, and it's not possible just to stay in safe and connected. As much as we try and we think that we want to be just safe and connected all the time, it's just not possible. And we know that, like, we're driving to work and there's traffic and we're running late, we're automatically going into fight or flight. Like, the world just isn't always, it's just not possible. So a healthy nervous system will move up and down the ladder depending on what's going on. What becomes dysregulated, and that's what we call regulated. So regulated isn't calm, regulated isn't happy. Regulated is just being able to match our body to the environment to meet our needs. Does that kind of sum up what you? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so to give you an example of this, I'll just move to the next one. So this is the example that I often give to people. It's an example from my own life, and I just think it really nicely illustrates. If you know me, you've probably heard this one before because I say it all the time. But several years ago, I went skydiving.
So brave.
It's a birthday present. I know it's wild because I would never do that now. Anyway, I was braver in my younger years. But before I got there, really excited. I was safe and connected. My family were coming with me. Yeah, just feeling really happy and great about what was happening. As I started to get suited up, the heart rate starts. Oh, sorry. I forgot that I had the mic on. So sorry if that was the people at home. As I started getting suited up, my heart rate starts going faster and faster. I start to get like overwhelmed. I feel a bit flushed. So I'm moving into fight or flight, or the sympathetic nervous system. Then I get up into the plane, feeling really nervous at this point. I'm like, oh gosh, there's not much. Come on in, guys. There's not much that I can do now that I'm like up here. And then just as I was about to jump out of the plane, I just had this moment where I was like, wow, I'm strapped to this man and I'm hanging out the side of a plane and there's nothing I can do now. There is like, I'm probably going to die. Nothing I can do. And this is where I go into shutdown. I was just like, I guess that's it. And jumped out of the plane. Everything was fine. I landed. But as I landed, then as soon as I unclipped, I started shaking. And I had this big rush of adrenaline because I'm coming up the ladder now. I'm coming up through fight or flight. And that's really important for people to remember, that when kids go through, well, when anybody goes through shutdown, you have to come back up the ladder the same way you went down. So now I'm shaking. Now I'm feeling sick. Probably the most nauseous I've ever felt in my life. And then about like an hour later, fine again. I was like, woo, that was amazing. Let's never watch the video. But that's like a really good example of how this sort of nervous system model works, that we come down through fight or flight into shutdown when we perceive we can't escape. And then once we've got some degree of safety, we can start coming back up. So this whole webinar, this whole seminar, I want you to be thinking about the whole point of, like, when we're thinking about helping our kids to regulate, what we're really saying is, how can we help them move back up the ladder? Yep. What did I want to say on that one?
You covered a lot of this already.
Yeah, I think I covered all that. I didn't realize.
Good job.
Sweet. Remember, regulation does not necessarily mean calm.
And that is mainly because if you're in shutdown, you don't want to tell someone to calm down more.
Yeah.
You know, you're not trying to say, calm down, calm down. You're actually trying to, you know, up-regulate their system.
Exactly.
So there are moments where the word calm might be appropriate, but yeah, regulated is more about being connected to self and safety.
Yeah. And I think that the other important thing here is that sometimes kids can have or even, I keep saying kids, but it's really just anybody with a nervous system, which is everybody. You can feel like
I don't know, I know a few people.
You know, when you've got this big emotional kind of experience, but it's not appropriate to actually talk about it. Like maybe you're at Christmas lunch with a family and someone makes a random comment, and you've just got to kind of like smile and, Yeah, that's cool. So that's shutdown, right? And so you can look calm on the outside. That doesn't actually mean that you're regulated. Doesn't actually mean that you're supporting your nervous system in the way that you need to support your nervous system. So
Yeah, exactly. All right, I would love to introduce everybody to Ross Greene. Has anybody in the audience here in person heard of Ross Greene before? We've got a few nods. Yeah, fantastic. Ross Greene is awesome. He is just really naturally very neurodivergent affirming, which is great. I'm going to his training on Monday. I'm going to be like a little fangirl in person.
that's
yes.
exciting.
And we got this email sent through and it was like, you know, bring the fidgets that you need, bring a sun hat for the lights on the roof, bring sunglasses to block. Like, it was just so affirming and meeting our needs, which was just awesome. And his main message is this idea that kids do well if they can. So if your child has the skills in that moment, they will do well. If they're not doing well, it's probably because they don't have the skills to meet that moment. They don't have the skills to get through that situation. Something is missing. And our job, your job as parents, is to try and figure out what skills are missing and collaboratively work with the kiddo to come up with a plan. So we've got kind of three main steps to his stuff. One is being really, really empathetic. And I love this phrase of just saying, hey, I notice you're blah, 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 blah. What's up? Super simple, but it invites conversation. And then use beautiful empathetic listening to hear your child, ask questions to draw it out. Use active listening, non-judgmental attitude, reflective statements like, oh yeah, I can really see that when you say that, I see that on your face. I see that, you know, that wince of pain or that anger in your fists. So lots of reflection in this empathetic stage where you're just trying to make a space for them to be and to talk. And then we move into the defining the problem stage. And this is where you're allowed to say that you're concerned about something. So it's not just about listen, listen, listen. What are we going to do about it? You are actually allowed to say, look, I'm actually really concerned after having listened and drawn it out. I'm actually really concerned that if you're not doing your homework, we're not going to make the most of school. Or I'm really concerned that, you know, running across the road without looking is actually quite unsafe, or whatever it is. So you're defining the problem and you're expressing your concerns. And be quite specific about what you're worried about. You're allowed to be really specific about, this is what I'm concerned about. And then the last step is an invitation to collaboratively problem solve. So this is where you might say to the child something like, you know, what do you think we can do to make homework time less stressful for you? Or what are we going to do about this road situation? I see you running out there. You're so excited. I love that you're so excited, but it's just not safe. What are we going to do about it? So inviting them to input after you've listened, you've been there, you've defined the problem, inviting them to collaboratively input into what they think you guys can do about it, and you make some steps together. So a couple of action points is do regular check-ins between these big moments. So this is like a big moment. Do regular check-ins because it's kind of like the sweep that you quickly do around the house to get rid of the dust. If you never do the sweep, then you're going to end up with a very, very dirty floor. So you need to do, we've got some people looking at each other here. That sweep needs to happen regularly. So that check-in needs to happen regularly to make sure that things aren't building up, and so that you can go to this plan if in your check-in something is coming up. And just, start that lovely conversation with that, hey, I noticed this is happening, what's up? Go into listening, define the problem, work together to make a solution.
What's the check-in?
A check-in could be something like, has anything happened today that was really, really challenging for you? Or what else could a check-in look like?
You know that thing that we spoke about on the weekend with the crossing the road? How did that go today?
Yeah.
Being curious, I think, and allowing for conversation about it, but also being okay if they're like, yep, everything's fine. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm here if it doesn't. If it changes.
Yeah, and Ross Greene's written a bunch of books. I would encourage everyone to read probably Raising Human Beings first, because it's his most recent. He wrote that in 2017. The Explosive Child is a couple of decades old now, but it's fabulous. I loved having that as a read. And there's lots more as well. There's some tailored to school, like really working on problems at school. And there's some others that are a bit more broad. So definitely get stuck into his work. And you can Google the collaborative and proactive solutions approach, and it comes up online with a lot of these kinds of ideas. So again, it's that I notice this is happening, what's up? Listen, define the problem, work together to make a solution. And it's a lovely way of working with neurodivergent children on helping them to start to identify what's going on in them that is difficult, and doing lots of reflective work. And
for them to come up with solutions too, because quite often like neurodivergent kids that I'm working with will come up with these amazing solutions that like I just wouldn't have been able to think about for the situation. Like they know themselves better than anybody, including professionals, including you as parents. Like they know themselves, so they can come up with those solutions.
And neuroaffirming care says to put the person at the centre and their lived experience at the centre. So that includes your child, even if they're 5. Put them at the centre, and their lived experience will help lead you in the problem solving.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about, so I guess I just want to caveat, because I'm aware as we're working through this that we're going to be giving you tonight lots of different types of strategies. It's okay if not all of them work for your kid, right? And it's probably unlikely that all of them work for your kid. But the idea is that hopefully you can grab something that will kind of help. And so if we're going to go through different types. So the next kind of idea that I think is really important when we're thinking about emotional regulation, especially in neurodivergent kids, is that these words that we have for emotions like anxious, sad, angry, things like that, they're kind of just words, right? They don't really they mean something because we as a society have given them something. But a lot of kids have their own language for explaining emotions, right? They might naturally explain it as, oh, that's when I'm going out of control, or that's when I go into rage, and they can come up with these wild names, right? Yeah, for different things that they're experiencing. And so it's okay to work with that language, right? If your child has a way of expressing a particular feeling, you don't have to change that to be, oh, that's what you're talking about is anxiety. You can be like, yep, that's fine. What you're saying there, that crazy weird name that you've come up with, let's just roll with it. Let's call it that, right? Because then they have a sense of ownership over what they're experiencing as well, right? It's not, we know better and this is actually anxiety and you don't really know what you're talking about. It's no, actually like, yep, this is your experience and this is what it's called. Let's go with it. So that can be for language, but it can also be for visuals as well, which I've got a few on the next slide. So some different ways of, these are just random ones that I've grabbed from different people over the years, but they can be different. So we've got different cats, we've got some different strange people and strange skeleton creatures. So I can't quite remember what they were. Different animals, different kind of police things. So these are just a few examples, and it can be honestly anything. So, but if your child has a way of expressing this sort of stuff, go with it. So fine. Yeah.
What was that example of yours? Something hungry butt.
Mew Mew Hungry Butt.
Mew Mew
That's
Hungry
probably
Butt.
my favorite.
Yeah.
My favorite. Mew Mew Hungry Butt. A name for anxiety. Solely favorite. Or yeah, Dirty Love Hardy Poopy. That was my other favorite. So these can get quite expressive.
Okay, so what is this idea of co-regulation? Oh, dang it, this means we have to do something. We're involved. So kids borrow our nervous system to regulate themselves, and this is called co-regulation. So again, this doesn't mean you have to be calm. If you're forcing the calm, it's actually likely that they're going to perceive the incongruence in the environment, which is a threat to their nervous system.
Yeah, right. Like the, oh, I'm not angry. Like, you know, that thing.
Yeah.
I'm just frustrated, you know, that kind of thing. Like that can be seen as a threat,
Yeah.
right? Because they're sort of picking up, oh no, like something's not okay here,
Or even
right?
like the big sigh, like the
Yeah,
The big sigh,
yeah,
yes.
okay, darling, you know, like
Yep.
I'm very
exactly.
conscious of the big sigh,
Yep.
which just saying I'm frustrated, but I'm going to try and pretend to be calm and attentive
Yeah.
now.
So being really aware of your body language is really important
Mhm.
as well. Yeah, absolutely.
My biggest encouragement, first tune into yourself. So yes, you have a screaming little monster of joy, but tune into yourself. What is going on here? Yeah. And regulate this. So whether that means you need to grab a carrot and start munching on something crunchy, whether that means you need to move and shake your body, whether that means you need to have some water, put on some music, just take a massive, massive out breath, whatever you need to do, regulate
and
yourself.
own that, right? It's like so what you were saying before about being aware of that big sigh, like that sigh might be really important for your nervous system. So it's okay to do that, but you can say like, oh, I'm just feeling really tired right now, or like
This is a tough
this is
moment.
really tough.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. Like just own whatever's going on for you, because then then the child knows that you've got it. Like you're on the level that they're on. And the other important thing here is that kids will set you up to feel what they're feeling. So if they're really frustrated, they're probably going to set you up to feel frustrated so that you can co-regulate back up the ladder together.
And that's not just woo-woo magic. That is actual science of the mirror neuron system. So our mirror neurons in our brain, when we see a child displaying a certain emotion, they play out in our brain like we're feeling that certain emotion. And then we start to feel that certain emotion. So for everyone watching me, if I sort of started,
And start to get really anxious.
yeah, like if I start to feel a certain way, you're all going to respond to that because of the mirror neurons in your brain. It's an amazing system, and it's there for raising and regulating children. So I would say after you've regulated yourself, tune into the kiddo and then adjust your approach so that it's matching what they need. So like if you in that moment feel like you need really, really big movements, but they're getting overwhelmed by the movement, adjust your approach to do something else. Regulate yourself in a different way. So you want your regulation to kind of match
what they need
in that moment.
So you're modeling how to regulate, right? Because kids aren't born with the capacity to regulate. Some children will naturally be more in tune with their body and therefore able to do that like a little bit more independently. But generally, they're watching what the adults in their life are doing to regulate, right? Well, yeah.
Which is where you get to
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, what we can.
I was just wondering if this sort of, partially explains why we're far more sort of activated by our own kids than say somebody else's child who might
Completely.
be anxious or dysregulated, and you sort of you want to help, you want to help them. Whereas it's your own child who's puffing and puffing and stamping their feet and wriggling around and everything. It's like what?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're so much more tuned in.
Exactly. You're more tuned in, but also it comes back to that the ladder that we were talking about before, where it's like our perception of danger, right? So when it's someone else's child who is experiencing distress, that doesn't actually reflect anything on you as a person. You don't have to deal with it. You don't really have to do anything, right? And so it's actually not a danger to you. But when your child's in distress, that is a danger to you, right? And so you're naturally going to become more activated. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this pyramid of learning was actually shown to me many years ago by an OT. And I think this is something that OTs do really well, and oftentimes like, well, I don't know, better than psychologists, but maybe I think that's changing. But we weren't taught this, right? And what I think is really important about this pyramid is it shows really nicely the sort of stages of how our nervous system operates and how we learn and how we engage in the world, right? And so our central nervous system underpins everything. But essentially, we need our sensory systems online first before we can engage in the world. Yeah. And then so our sensory systems are kind of foundational. If we can't sense, if we can't actually gather input from the environment, then we can't engage with it, because it'd be, you know, the extreme equivalent of, you know, being deaf and blind, right? So why I think this is really important is when your child is in nervous system overwhelm, so in that shutdown place, we need to actually regulate through sensory needs first before we can get up to the higher parts of the, oh, I just realized that all the words are funny, that's okay. Until we get to the top of the pyramid, which is actually being able to engage in that cognitive piece, that cognitive reasoning piece, right? And so this is where, like, you know, the CPS that Brie was talking about before with Ross Greene, like, that's really great. But sometimes kids can't even engage in that conversation at all, right? And so if you've got a kiddo that can't even engage in any level of conversation when they're in that kind of fight or flight or shutdown, then that's a sign that actually their sensory needs need to be met first, yeah? And so we actually need to regulate them through their sensory needs before we can do any kind of problem solving, any kind of reasoning, right? We've all had that experience where we're trying to talk to a child who's in shutdown. We're like, what's wrong? What's wrong? We just want them to engage with us, like, verbally, right? Because as adults, we're very verbal people. We can do the problem solving on a verbal level, but a lot of the time kids can't. And so we need to focus on their sensory systems first. So that's where, let's go to the next slide. This idea of brain reset breaks sort of come in. And brain reset breaks, I mean, they're just a word. You can call it whatever you want. But it's this idea of, like, empowering kids to meet their own sensory needs, right? And we do that through identifying, okay, well, when you're feeling really overwhelmed, when you're in shutdown, or when you're in fight or flight, what are the things that actually help you move back up through that ladder? Yeah. And so we start to get kids to problem solve this, right? When they're safe, when they're connected, we start to problem solve. What are some of the things that help you? Are they fidget toys? Is it being in a swing? Is it being in a dark place? What's the sensory need that you need to help move you back up the ladder? And the really cool thing about, like, making this explicit is that then kids can own it. The idea is that hopefully kids can get to a place where they say, I need a BRB. I need a brain reset break. I need to swing in my swing for a little bit of time, or they can actually kind of meet that need themselves. And this can look like a whole sorts of things. It can look like fidgets, it can look like toys, it can look like swinging, it can look like movement, it can look like reading, kicking a ball. There's many different things that this could look like. So it's all going to be dependent on what your child needs at any particular point. But I'll show you a little bit about how to pick them. So if you go to the next slide. So coming back to this idea of the polyvagal ladder, the way that we pick a suitable BRB or a suitable sensory need for our child, because at first they're going to need you to do this for them, right? They're not going to be able to just work this out themselves. They're going to need some help, either from you or from a support person or whatever. The first thing we need to identify is, okay, well, where is your child now? If they're in shutdown, they're going to actually need something that helps, like, get them back to up through, like, mobilizes them a little bit, right? And that actually, the way that we do that is almost through, like, helping them kind of feel safe in their body again. We want them to help feel a little bit more safer in their body again. We want something that's grounding, something that's going to sort of support them to feel in the world again. So that can sometimes be somewhere, quiet, cocooned, a big hug, or kind of laying some tummy time's really good. So that kind of sensory pressure, anything that's kind of like just grounding and safe, right? once they've kind of gone through that kind of grounding and safe, you might actually experience this fight or flight thing again, right? And you're like, wow, you were just like calm, and now all of a sudden you're kind of yelling at me again, and I'm not really sure like what's going on there. That's actually what the nervous system's meant to do, right? It's okay for them to be a little bit more activated after they're coming out of this shutdown space. It just means that then they need another outlet for that adrenaline that's going through their body at that time. So that's when they probably want something that's a little bit more like active, maybe has a little bit more connection. So, kicking a ball back and forward, jumping on the trampoline, playing a game together, something like that helps them kind of move back into this safe and connected space. Once you're in safe and connected, then you can go and have the amazing conversations about problem solving and engaging.
Absolutely.
Is there anything to add to that?
I just wanted to add about the breathing. So the breath need in these sections is different. So I wouldn't say to a shutdown child, take a slow breath, because that's actually going to shut them down even more. I think in fight or flight, that's when you might need that slow breath to slow the heart rate, slow the system down. But in shutdown, the breath actually needs to be quite sort of invigorating and big, and that's when you might get them to
do the heavy sighs,
to really move the air around. So I would say to a kid, take whatever breath you think your body needs, and they'll know.
Absolutely.
They'll do whatever their body needs in that moment.
Are there any questions online about that?
Well, I mean, the one question I've had so far is tips for managing when your child's quite activated, so screaming or aggressive, and you find you're not able to co-regulate with them. Could the parent go away and take a break?
We're going to talk about meltdowns and shutdowns next. So that's a perfect question for the next slide.
If there's no questions on this, but that's okay. We will come to all the questions. Perfect. Cool.
Yeah. What does shutdown actually look like? Like, I'm not sure that I've got those two quite separated in my head.
We're so glad you asked. This is the next slide.
Absolutely. Great question.
What an amazing question.
So I would say either way, whether it's a meltdown or a shutdown, particularly our autistic kiddos, they've got 1 to 10, and then they don't have 10 to 90, and then they've got 90 to 100. So you might find that your ADHDs are like that as well. But they're kind of okay, and then boom, and they're just not okay anymore. Do people relate to that? Yeah, absolutely.
Is that the tiniest thing?
The tiniest thing.
Oh, okay.
So the straw.
And then
Well,
don't
advising,
forget
catch
to
the early
take your plate
cues.
in.
Boom. Yep. And we're missing those middle numbers.
I can't see my butter anymore.
It can be it seems like the silliest thing, but to them it's so important.
So you ask how they are at the end of the school day.
You ask how they are.
And your question is the impetus for them to lose it.
Yep. So that was, you ask how they are at the end of the day, and then the question is the tipping point. Absolutely. So this is, at this point, you don't do a lot of reflecting back all the things that you see. I see your face is doing this, and I see, no, you keep the words really, really minimal, and you just have to give them a neuroception of safety. So neuroception of safety means a brain idea that they are okay. How would you explain that?
So again, I think I was meant to say it at the beginning when we were talking about the polyvagal ladder, but the thing that moves us down the ladder is this kind of sixth sense that we're not safe, right? And so that's neuroception. It's this idea of just our degree of safety in this world, right? Like right now, I feel like mostly I'm safe. I know that I'm safe. There's a little part of me that's like, wow, you're talking to a lot of people, and that's really scary. And so my neuroception of danger is probably a little bit elevated right now.
Yeah, so you have to just do what you can in that moment, like to that question from our person at home. When they're kicking and screaming and it's just going absolutely nuts, you really need to give them this neuroception of safety. Use few words. Their lid has flipped, and a really interesting thing, I'm doing a mentalizing course at the moment, and in terms of mentalizing, which is kind of like perspective taking plus a little bit more, when someone's out of their window of tolerance, they can't perspective take. And I know that sounds really simple, but like if you actually now think back over all those moments with your little one when they were outside of their window of tolerance and you're trying to say, can't you see it from my perspective? Like, you know, I just had to carry all the shopping in by myself and blah, blah, blah. No, they can't see it from your perspective. They literally can't. They don't have their frontal lobes switched on. They're all in their amygdala, which is further back in the brain. And they cannot perspective take in that moment. So we need to kind of treat it like a seizure and just go for safety.
Yeah. And that means your safety as well, like, and the safety of siblings or, you know, other people that might be there too. Like, it's okay to just do what you need to do to keep everyone safe in those moments.
And yes, to that person from home, that might mean walking out of the room.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Yep. It might mean sitting down in the corner and just repeating the same phrase over and over again.
Yeah. I'm here. I'm with you.
You're safe. I'm here.
Yeah.
You're safe.
Yeah. Question.
So I'm just trying to connect this with the previous slide where we're taking certain actions when there's fight or flight, which is largely a meltdown, right?
Yeah.
And shutdowns. So I'm actually hearing two different things. Do this or do a different thing, but I'm sure it's somehow.
Yeah.
So how does that come together?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you and Brie, if you rewind back to that last slide. Yeah, so this one, so this is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So we're saying like when they're in shutdown, do this with it. There's a difference between, and you'll know it, right? Like there's a difference between them, your kid being in fight or flight, and you being able to be regulated in there with them, right? And them being in the position where you like that you can't actually co-regulate with them.
When you can't affect with
exactly.
these,
Yes.
and it's
So
probably on the extremes.
Exactly. So this is when you can co-regulate, when you have enough sense of safety yourself to be able to be there with them in that, right? Whereas if a child is becoming very aggressive, which often looks like violence, or they might be hitting, punching, yelling, screaming, things like that, that really throw you out of your capacity to regulate yourself, that's when you go into just do the safety seizure control stuff.
Yeah. I think it's also on top of that piece, it's also about how connected to themselves they are.
Yeah.
So if they've gone to the absolute nth degree and they're not connected to their frontal lobes at all, you know, you're not going to use the words and stuff.
Yeah.
That's when you're just going to do the neuroception of safety.
Yeah.
Great question.
And if we've got to the state where we're not in our frontal lobe either.
Yes.
You just,
you need that time apart.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's was directed to me.
Yeah.
I know it
We've
was.
all been there.
Well, I think that's really important. Like,
I've actually pulled myself quote unquote in time out. I've said to the kids, I'm so angry. I need to walk away and have a minute to calm down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's
And
okay
I've done
to do.
it not so elegantly as well.
Yeah. So safety first, then if you can regulate, use this. Yeah.
We had that question about what's the difference between shutdown and a meltdown. And I would kind of loosely say that a meltdown is the extreme of the fight or flight. And a shutdown is the extreme of that shutdown, of the shutdown stage, that dorsal ventral vagal shutdown stage. And it looks different for everybody. I know, I'm trying to think for myself and my clients and the people that I've seen this happen to, like shutdown often is when a lot of, I'm thinking for my little ones that I work with, my teens, a lot of self-injurious behavior, like they can actually go into self-harm in that moment. And we haven't got a sort of thing. I would say that's in shutdown. Breath holding in shutdown, definitely.
A lot of I don't
knows, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Like as in they're just not responding.
Yep. It's like the ultimate freeze mode. They can't think things through. Yeah.
I was walking past someone on the street today who had obviously just gotten some really bad news, and for them it was very clear because it was a full-on pause, almost like their brain was buffering.
Yeah. So we're just saying like it can look like brain buffering. Sorry, I just came for the microphone. But
It's that ultimate, like the whole body just goes still and is like in shock for a moment.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
that real shock. Yeah.
Yeah.
And oftentimes like meltdowns, I mean, you said it exactly before. Meltdowns is the extreme of the externalizing behavior, and then shutdown is the extreme of the internalizing behavior, right? We haven't got a thing on self-harm, but is it all right if you go back and find it?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I think that what's important is that we can't stay in fight or flight forever. Like our adrenals just burn out. Like we literally aren't built for staying in fight or flight. But if we're stuck in fight or flight and we can't move back up to safe and connection, the only other place that we can go is down. And that's where self-harm comes in. That's when alcohol use comes in, or drug use. It's shutting down, it's turning off the fight or flight, right? And so people use those sorts of methods to regulate themselves, right? It's not helpful in the long run, as we all know, but in the short term, it does help them move out of that fight or flight, right? And so, yeah, if you've got somebody who is engaging in one of those methods of regulation, what's really important is trying to give them another option for meeting that same need, which is a regulation need. Yeah.
Yeah. It all comes back to regulation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I really wanted to touch on quickly the difference between an ADHD, autistic, and AuDHD sense of dysregulation, because I know in this room we've got different sort of presentations of our kids, and probably at home we've got a whole plethora of different presentations as well. And we have to think about why the dysregulation is happening to give us cues and clues to what we need to do about it. So for an autistic brain type, there's so much sensory overload. And so that means we need to reduce the sensory overload and use the sensory tools, like Jade was saying with that triangle, use the sensory tools to regulate.
And that sometimes means like blocking out the sensory stuff. So the sensory tools you might use is that kind of cocooning, or noise cancelling headphones, or something to actually reduce the sensory stimulation.
To meet the sensory needs might completely mean blocking everything out. Absolutely. For an autistic neurotype, social differences can lead to dysregulation. So you're struggling to pick up what's happening in the room. I know this has happened for me so many times. You're struggling to pick up what's happening in the room, and then you just feel absolutely awful about yourself in the world. It can lead you totally into this dysregulated state. So it's really important to to address that when you're working with the regulation as well. And maybe that means first meeting the sensory needs, because they're going to be sensory overloaded as well from the social situation, and then talking through the social stuff as well, helping them make sense of that. For an autistic brain type, the routine and predictability in transitions can lead to dysregulation. Communication challenges can lead to dysregulation. And so what that means is reestablishing routine, being predictable, using simple language and visual aids, using their preferred touch, and validating their feelings. So trying to think about, for that brain type, what was the trigger, and therefore what will the regulation type be?
And just to connect that back again to that visual, what you're talking about there is like, what tools does this person need to stay safe and connected, or to be safe and connected in this world? And yeah, so for an autistic brain, like reducing the sensory overwhelm is going to help them feel safe in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for an ADHD brain, there's so much impulsivity going on, which can lead to dysregulation. There's a frustration intolerance. So like just an ADHD brain is so much easily frustrated because there's this restlessness. So they're so easily frustrated. And then there's the hyperactivity and attention and focus, and all of that can lead to, their specific style of dysregulation. And because of that, we need to really work on minimizing distractions and doing something calming, using real physical movement breaks, giving clear and simple instructions. That old classic about giving one instruction at a time is not made up. It's so real. Just give one simple instruction at a time. Sometimes it needs to be half an instruction. And using consistent routines, visual schedules, and validating feelings as well. So you've just got to think about, okay, for this brain type, what do they specifically
And
need?
this is also like proactive strategies. This is trying to avoid them moving down the ladder.
That's
This
right.
is trying to keep them feeling safe and connected.
Yep. And then if you have a little AuDHDer, that's really fun for you.
More choices.
You have to be so flexible and so creative because they are going to be a big mix of all of this.
And it's going to look different.
Yes,
for
it
every-
looks different for every person. Okay.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Was this me? Do you want me to
Both of
show?
us, yep.
Okay, sweet. So have people heard of PDA? Yeah,
Yeah. Great.
So PDA, which some people would call it pathological demand avoidance. And then in the neuroaffirming kind of community, or a lot in the autistic community, the preferred term for this is a persistent drive for autonomy. But yeah, whatever you call it, it's kind of the same thing. So PDA is relatively new in the sense that it's not a formal diagnosis. It might be in the future, but at the moment it's not. And what that means is we don't really have, like us as professionals at least, we don't really have a framework for knowing exactly what this is, right? But the research to date and the big names in the field are kind of thinking about PDA as a disability of the nervous system. So you know at the beginning how we said that a healthy nervous system will move up and down that emotional ladder healthily throughout the day, right? And so what PDA is under this framework is that it's kind of like an oversensitive sense of neuroception. So it's an oversensitive sense of danger in the environment, which means that little things that we know are not like putting our child at risk, like asking them to make their bed, are suddenly perceived as a threat to their safety. And that comes from a place of a threat to their autonomy. If we're telling somebody to do something, they no longer have choice around that. And that's seen as a threat, and it will drive them into fight or flight. The tricky thing about this is that for these kids, this is happening all the time, every day, which can be really, really tricky when we're just asking you to do all these things, you know, follow the steps and do the BRBs and everything. And you're sitting there being like, but this is every 5 minutes. And so I recognize that can be really tricky. And actually the PDA child is borrowing your nervous system pretty much 24/7. If it's not your nervous system, it's a teacher's nervous system or the therapist's nervous system. They need to borrow someone else's nervous system all the time to help them regulate. It's often why the PDA children are pretty socially motivated, even if they have, even if they might be autistic, they still are really socially motivated kids because they're borrowing other people's like nervous systems.
So any wanting lots of social contact?
Yeah. And being close by. Yeah. I don't like to be alone. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I don't
right.
think I'm following what borrowing.
Sorry, yes. Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
sorry. Great question. Yeah. When I say borrow the nervous system, remember we go back to that idea of what co-regulation is. So when I say borrowing the nervous system, what I mean is they're looking to you to help them regulate all the time.
But how's that connect to this? That's the bit I'm missing.
So if a child is moving into fight or flight, like several times an hour, they're going to be looking to you for co-regulation several times an hour.
Yeah, that's the trigger.
Yeah, exactly. It's the constantness of it that makes this really difficult. And I want to, be really upfront about that because a lot of families, it's
hard.
really hard.
Is there a different way of, I mean, you have to make demands, you have epilepsy, you
Yes.
take your medication,
Mhm.
and if that's the thing that sets them off, no, run around. Like, is there a different way of framing?
There certainly is. So the question was, is there a
Thank you for leading us to the next slide.
is there a different way of
This next
of-
step for you. I'm giving you all.
is there a different way of framing demands? Yes, absolutely. And we'll get
Absolutely.
there in a second. Yeah, but just before we change slides, I just want to say that if we're thinking about this as a disability of the nervous system, it is not a choice. These kids are not malicious. These kids are not outwardly defiant. They're not
out to get you.
They're not out to get
planning
you.
it.
Like, this is something that, like, these kids are in distress a lot. Yeah.
So how is this different from oppositional defiance disorder?
So the question is, how is this different to oppositional defiance disorder? Great question. A lot of these PDA kids would have previously been diagnosed with ODD.
Yeah.
ODD is a formal diagnosis in the diagnostic manual, right? And so absolutely it would have. The reason that there's a move away from this ODD label is actually one of the criteria is that it's somewhat, what's the word? Vindictive. Yeah. Yeah. And we just know that that's not the case. Yeah.
I've heard it described as the difference is that ODD would be I won't, whereas PDA is I can't.
Yeah. So that was just for those at home. The difference is the ODD is I won't versus I can't in the PDA, and that's definitely
And I think ODD they often see coming from a trauma.
Yes,
but PDA is something you're born with that brain type.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I just wanted to go through a quick list of what a demand might look like because it might shock you.
There are many.
There are many. It could be a direct instruction. What's an example of direct instruction?
Get me a glass of water. No.
Make me a cup of tea.
Make me a cup of tea. No, but it could be, it's time to put your shoes on.
Something like that. It could be the routine activities of the day. It's time for breakfast. Demand. It could be the social expectation that you have to be quiet while other people are talking, or it's turn taking or whatever. It could be something as simple as that. Schoolwork and homework, transitions, time pressures, unpredictable situations, authority figures, or even this one gets me to my core. I feel so sad for this. Self-imposed demands like personal goals. Like your kiddo might decide they really want to build this Lego and they want to finish it, but that is a demand, and so they kind of shut down or they freak out.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. That's so relatable though, right? Like, think about all the like uni assignments or any, you no one's making you be there. But except for yourself. But it's sometimes that can still be really hard to do, right?
Have you heard of adults that even the internal like hunger cue can set it off?
Yeah, absolutely.
So internal cues, hunger cues, needing to go to the bathroom, those sorts of things. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a demand.
Yeah.
So to that nervous system.
Yeah. So if you're imagining like how often these sorts of things come into our nervous system every day, that's how often these kids can be dropping into that fight or flight space. Yeah. So it's happening. It can happen a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, there are alternative ways to handle asking for things and that sort of thing, because we're not saying live a no demand lifestyle. We're saying live a low demand lifestyle.
Yeah.
They're very different. There are going to be demands, but there are ways to go about it that just don't set off the nervous system. They're right at the edge of their window of tolerance that doesn't set them off as much as put your shoes on or it's time for breakfast.
Yeah.
Where does that fit? I mean, you're saying that this is not necessarily trauma related, it's sort of what you're born with this. But at the same time, can kids kind of develop it as a part of it? Sit in your fight or flight thing, or if the kid doesn't have this, then they're not going to have it?
I think there's a difference between, so the question was like, can kids develop this as they grow up, or is this you're born with it and you're going to get it?
There's also a question in the chat around does PDA change or lessen?
Does PDA change or lessen with age? Yeah. So what we know is that kids and adults of any age can experience PDA. So it's definitely something that adults that can experience as well. There's a difference between when we say trauma sometimes, some people think, their abuse, neglect, things like that, right? Which absolutely traumatic. Sometimes the mismatch in the environment between like our needs and the environment can also sometimes be perceived by the brain as trauma, right? And so yes, if if your brain needs a low demand environment and you're in a really high demand environment. So an example of this that I see actually quite often is the kids in year 11 and 12 at some of the private schools that are doing 1,000 extracurriculars, and every sort of minute of their day is scheduled out, and it becomes so much that they don't want to engage in anything, right? And so that's an example of how like this person's brain and the environment are mismatched, and that's what's causing this sense of danger, right?
They might have been okay with it.
But they might have been okay when they were younger and the demands were less, or the expectations were less, or if they were in a different setting where the expectations or the demands were less as well. So yes, it can change throughout life depending on the environment that they're in. And as the demands naturally increase as kids get older, sometimes that's why we see like a spike in adolescence. We've also got the hormonal changes that come with adolescence as well. So you're kind of piling on distressing things on top of each other. I don't know how anyone gets through being a teenager. Does that answer your question? Sort of? Kind of?
I was more kind of wondering if, if it might be simmering there, and because of the way I say things or do things or whatever, that sort of makes it worse. That's kind of what I'm wondering.
Yeah. Like
are there ways of managing things so that you don't trigger it or
Yeah, I think so. Yes, there are ways that you can phrase things and the ways that you can change the environment to be less demanding so that this isn't triggered as much. Yes, that's true. Yeah. But also you're a human who needs to get stuff done. Yeah. And so if you feel like you're walking around on eggshells, like that's not great either, right? So this is where we talk about like it is really, really hard. We can tell you to do these things, but the reality of like actually living a low demand life can sometimes be just impossible, right?
That was my next question, which is not a lot of people in the world have read these books.
Sure.
So how do my teenage kids grow up to be functioning adults and have an awareness that, allows them to not have, to manage this as effectively as they can?
I hear that a lot.
Do you want to talk?
Which means you have the answer, right?
You'll write a book.
My answer to the parents that ask me that question, and I really do hear that a lot.
Yeah.
So the question for the people at home is basically like, but the world's not set up like that, kind of. It's not
People
everyone
have to go to work and
their university lecturer and their boss haven't read the low demand parenting and declarative language handbook.
Yeah.
I would say on part we're kind of hoping that the person learns to advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that this could look at a university level is having accommodations in place that maybe they have flexible due dates. Maybe there's someone that can support them to sit down and break up the assignments that doesn't feel so like overwhelming, or even taking a part-time load. Exactly. So the idea is that hopefully they understand, by the time they're adults, they can understand their needs enough to be able to advocate for what they need within tertiary education, the workplace, community places. So yeah.
It may just take long for some.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And again, we come back to this idea that like this is a disability, right? And when we're thinking about disability, it doesn't mean that it will be cured, right? This is something this person needs to learn to manage within a neurotypical world, to the best of their ability, right? And sometimes that's not going to look like them functioning in the way that a neurotypical person functions. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, is there much, obviously it's not like a hugely researched thing yet, but has the sensory processing and sensory component of the world been considered as a demand in that space? Because obviously then your brain's already having to deal with and process that input as well.
So the question was, has a sensory input perceived as demands? So it depends on the individual.
It's like our modern world compared to 100 years
yeah.
ago.
Yeah, I think like when we're thinking about like the access to a sensory overwhelm through like social media and things like that, potentially. Probably depends on the individual. I don't know the research in that space. So yeah, great question though. Yes.
So, but usually a demand in PDA would be something that threatens autonomy.
Yes.
So usually it's from another person.
Yes.
And restricts their freedom.
Or their own expectations of themselves. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
the question was, yes, a demand is something that restricts autonomy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to build autonomy. We're trying to build a sense of autonomy through things like forced choices. Like, would you like to eat the Weet Bix or the pancakes this morning? Or giving them information about their world, but not placing a demand. So what that could look like is, hey, it's breakfast time. Like, what are we doing for breakfast this morning? So allowing a sense of like autonomy and choice within the bounds of what needs to be done.
It's really funny that you used the example a while back of putting on shoes.
Yes.
Because for us, it's one of the most, for our eldest, it's excruciating in the mornings, and it can take 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Because she'll basically start untying the laces, and then something shiny materializes in her periphery, and she's off for the next 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm quite reactive to that because I'm not the best myself in the morning. I feel quite sort of overwhelmed by the world in the morning, and we're sort of we're under quite a lot of time pressure. I'm working really hard on sort of starting with, like, you did such an amazing job with your shoes yesterday. Like,
what actually has been working is we've taken away the demand of untying the shoelaces from the night before, which she inevitably didn't untie. She just slipped her feet out. So they're already untied. Yeah. And when she puts them on, and also if I sit next to her, don't talk to her, just sit next to her.
Body doubling. Yeah.
Sit next to her and put your shoes on.
So what you're talking about there is body doubling, right? And it's a really popular tool, especially in ADHD, where being in the same space as someone who's trying to get something done just allows like an increased level of like engagement. Is that how you describe it? That means that it can actually get things done a little bit quicker. But you're right that all you did was untie the shoelace the night before, reduces
magically solved
but it reduces the demand. And
it's one we all deal with as well. I was going to say, we've started walking to school barefoot, and when he enough sensory from the ground.
No wonder Crocs are so popular.
We're even thinking, like, if we're going to invest in it, I can't remember the brand, but those gorgeous looking shoes with, like, they've got lock lace.
Zips. Exactly, right? So reduce demand.
That's an answer, but at the same time, like,
that's right. But and think about the way that you reduce the demands in your own life, right? Like, we do this naturally. We're efficient people, we're efficient creatures. We try and do things to reduce the demands ourselves so that, like, it's easier later down the track. We all know that it's easier to wash up one bowl than 50 bowls, right? That's an extreme example, but it's the same kind of thing. Like, we do things to reduce our demands later.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes some creativity. Dealing with the PDA and the demands, for sure.
Usually step is too small to break it down into.
Just keep breaking it down. Yeah,
absolutely.
So, offering choices and shared decisions, gentle suggestions such as, like, oh, I wonder if it might be an idea to start your homework soon rather than do your homework. The way you use language is really important. Curious statements. I'm curious if you want to try this, that sort of thing. It might just feel less like a do it now.
Well, sometimes even saying, hey, like, I want this and you want that. How are we both going to get this done? So, like, allowing them to generate the potential solution themselves.
Absolutely. There's so many suggestions. I could read them all out, but
these are all from these books.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, are these more on this topic?
Yes.
So I read the low demand parenting one very recently and I loved it. This is from a parent who had to go into low demand parenting because her PDA child was not coping. And it's great. She gives really, really great permission to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Pick your battles is that one. Yeah.
Help schools.
How do we help schools? That is a whole other topic. Yeah. And we actually know, like, legit, we have talked about potentially even getting a teacher in to talk about some of that stuff. Oh yeah, here we have a teacher.
Can I just
Yeah,
say,
hold on.
whatever works at home,
Yeah.
whatever you are trying, tell the teacher. We want to know so we can try and do the same thing. at
Yeah.
school.
So whatever
If strategies aren't working at home, then they work at school.
Yeah, so the comment was whatever works at home, tell the teacher they want to know, because those are the strategies that'll work at school.
Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely. Yeah.
That's great.
But it's a big topic, and I think deserves its own space and time. Yeah, cool.
Definitely.
I think we have some other resources. Do we want to go into those?
Yeah, so I was just wanting to tell everyone about these all about autism, all about ADHD booklets that we've, thanks, Amy, highly recommend. We've put them together ourselves from a neurodiversity affirming place. The all about AuDHD for adults is coming. It'll be ready probably in the next month or so. And they give lots of clues, especially sort of for people a little bit earlier on in the journey.
Like recently diagnosed, you can really benefit from these sorts of things. Great to resource to give to family and things like that as well. Yeah. Great Christmas present.
I got it as a birthday present.
Oh, there we go. Birthday present.
That's
Yeah.
nice. Yeah. So we've got polyvagal theory. You can dive into anything Deb Dana or Stephen Porges. They're the ones that kind of coined polyvagal and developed it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love The Whole Brain Child. I reckon I've listened to it because I struggle to read the books, but I can listen to them.
Yeah.
I reckon I've listened to it about 6 or 7 times. It's just so interesting and it's full of ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then aggression in play therapy. I am obsessed with Lisa Dion, and that book is not just for therapists. I would highly recommend it to parents of kids who can get aggressive too, because it helps you learn your boundaries and when to put a boundary in place, when to allow the aggression.
And it's pretty much all about co-regulation.
Yeah, it's all about that.
Like Lisa Dion, they are marketed towards therapists, but as parents, like, it's really easily consumable, especially that podcast, Lessons from the Playroom. It's free. They're really short episodes, and it's all just about co-regulation.
Into the teenage space.
Completely. Anyone with a nervous system.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Your partners, friends. Yeah.
No, definitely.
Sure. And you might have to pick your episode.
Aggression in play therapy or aggression in play therapy?
So she's talking about aggression in play therapy.
Okay.
But honestly, it'll give you so much rich, good tips and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if you have the polyvagal thing as a basis as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Ross Greene, get into it, read some of his books. He's amazing.
Is he coming to Canberra on Monday?
He's coming to Canberra, yeah.
There you go.
Yep, so he's got the school book as well. And then some PDA experts and books.
Yeah, Casey has a podcast at Peace Parents, and she also has a website where she runs courses and stuff. I haven't done any of the courses, so I can't speak for them exactly, but her podcast is really good and gives some good practical strategies for managing PDA. She's a parent herself with a PDA child, so has lots of good lived experience stuff as well.
And even her on Instagram, she gives heaps of advice. And then Christy Forbes is Australian. She again is a PDA herself and has PDA kids. And she's hilarious. Her Instagram posts are hilarious. And she's just so real. And she does courses and stuff too. So highly recommend those.
Cool. All right.
The last thing we wanted to plug was
yes.
just something like a Tuning Into Kids, Tuning Into Teens group, parenting group, because they really help you do exactly that, tune in. And that's what we're talking about today, is tuning into your own nervous system and into your kiddo's nervous system. So.
And the kids group will be starting here next week. So if you're interested in that, and kids is
next year, it got
term 1
next year.
Next year. And that will be up to kind of 10-year-olds, and then anybody kind of 11 plus the teens group will be running online too. So these are just great. I mean, we don't run them ourselves, but Connection in Mind come to do that. So there's the link there if anybody wants it.
And the last thing is, these are just some of the groups we run. Yeah, they're all from a neuroaffirming place. They're fun. Just kids and adults come and hang out and do their thing. So jump on our website if you're interested in that. Unfortunately, for people in other states, none of them are online at the moment.
Yeah. But keep your eye out. We might do something in future.
And there's capacity in the groups?
Yeah, so next year we'll be running the MindD Mind group again, which is for kids learning about their neurodivergent identity.
And what age does that start? Like, what's the youngest that you're able?
We've had 7-year-old before, but we try and kind of pair kids together in a sort of similar age group, because otherwise it can get a bit difficult. But yes, 8 is probably good. Like if they have a higher level of engagement, 7. But yeah. And
I'll run a creative feelings group, which is just for any kids that really like creative stuff.
And I think we'll run a board games group as well.
Is that the drama-based one?
Yeah, 1 week is a drama week. We have like watercolor week, drama week, music week, play week. You know, it's all different modalities, but we're exploring ourselves, our identity, the world through those mediums.
Is there anything?
What have I done? I think it's about the same, sort of 7 or 8. If I had a lot of interest of younger kids, I would run a younger kids one.
Yeah, that one's
it's
quite
flexible.
Yeah, whereas MindD Mind is a lot more content based, I suppose.
Yeah. And the board game or tabletop?
Yes, so Tabletop Titans will, again, like that's very flexible with ages. I'll try and match age and interest and things like that as well. Yeah. Cool. Any questions? Do we have any questions online?
So there's one question around people who are saying, someone I know would suggest that instead of finding new ways to help kids tie shoelaces, kids need to learn more discipline and respect with their parents.
Yeah.
Can I please ask how you would respond to that?
So how I would respond to the question about discipline and respect.
I'm glad that's working for your family. I love that, Amy.
Yeah. Again, like I think know for yourself first, like convince yourself first that the way that you're doing things, it makes sense for your family. And I guess the thing that I keep coming back to is that kid in that other family that's focused on discipline and respect, how much are they actually feeling safe and connected versus how much are they actually just in shutdown?
Or masking.
Yeah. Exactly.
They're so neurotypical that they're fine in that.
Right.
It actually genuinely works for some people.
Boundaries are useful.
So
actually quite safe.
So I think that, like, even though we sort of said it tongue in cheek, that comment of like, well, that works for you, it doesn't work for me, like that is absolutely valid and okay to use. And like,
it's good to rehearse these answers.
Rehearse them, definitely in the mirror.
Absolutely. And just and I guess it's also about like other people don't need to understand your way of doing things for it to be valid, right? I know that gets really tricky when we're talking about, you know, mothers or mothers-in-law or, you know, extended family, where there is a lot of maybe pressure. But if you're feeling that as a parent, like that's, you know, that's not actually about your parenting capacity. That's about this other person's discomfort with uncomfortable feelings. It says more about how they're not regulating. I hope that makes sense.
Too, like bringing like a peanut butter sandwich to Christmas lunch, and they're like, "Why are you making special?" And I was like, "Well, it's either this or he has a meltdown because he's hungry."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just own it.
You can choose which would you prefer.
Kind of educating others in your own style.
If I bring safe food, you might try some of the other food as opposed to
exactly.
We can either all deal with this, or he can just sit there and eat what
And just know that your advocacy for your child is going to help them advocate for themselves. So keep doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. Playing the long game.
Any other questions online?
Just one last one. Where would you go for a PDA assessment for an adult?
Ooh, that's very interesting.
Some people consider, and again, it's not actually well researched, but a lot of people consider PDA to be a profile of autism. I don't know what I think about that yet. I'm open to learning more about it as the research emerges. So I'd question whether this person's asking for an autism assessment for themselves. If so, that can be done through a psychologist who specializes in autism assessments. If it's just PDA, what would you say?
So I would say if you already have an autism diagnosis and you're wondering if you have PDA, I would wonder why you need a full assessment. And
it's not a diagnosis.
Because that's what I was going to say. It's not in the DSM-5.
Yeah.
So I would say find a professional who knows a lot about it.
Yeah.
And just spend some time exploring. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And go to these resources and self identification is also really valid. You don't need a professional to tell you. If it resonates with you, it resonates with you.
Yeah, that's right. So power to you. Just explore. Yeah.
Yes.
What do we do when we have the calm discussion with our kid about, what do we think we could use, what strategies could we use, etc., and you agree on something, but then when it comes to it, that is perceived as a demand and sends them from a 0 to 100.
Yes, totally.
So you've had the calm and collected conversation about next time, this happens.
My stress ball and throw it at the curtains or
You've got a plan for what your sensory tool might be,
and then them starting to escalate, and you go, let's bring in, and then totally flip.
Totally, yep, absolutely. So I've got some ideas. Do you want to do it?
I was just going to say maybe it's about in that moment, you start to regulate yourself as they're starting to get dysregulated and you're tuning in and you're adjusting what you're doing. Maybe that stress ball is just not right for that moment and it's going to take some time to learn how to read that cue. But just because you've agreed on it doesn't mean you have to go through with it in the moment. Be flexible. And is there something else that could to help to regulate them in that moment?
What I find with my boy is that he knows that if he regulates, he won't get his desired outcome. And so any attempt to veer him into a regulated state, as soon as he realizes that's what's happening, and if it's a meltdown about having to go to school, or that he realizes that if he regulates, that will mean going to school, he will escalate again.
Yeah. And so I think that is an example that probably would benefit from working through one-on-one with somebody, right? Because it's a little bit more specific. But I guess to talk a bit generally about that idea that if your kid is wanting to stay in the dysregulation because that feels validating, then it's just about validating that feeling. If they're keeping it up, it's because they don't think that they're not convinced that you understand yet how distressing it is for them in that moment. So you just kind of keep focusing on that co-regulation and being in there, being that with them. And then the strategy then when they're back to safe and connected would be about, well, how can you communicate that you don't want to do something in a way that's more appropriate for the situation as well. So, and maybe that does mean if he comes to you and he says, I don't want to do something in a sort of if he communicates that in an appropriate manner, maybe that does mean that you kind of reinforce that to kind of build that communication. But again, now we're getting into kind of specifics about a particular case. And I think it would be good to talk through that with somebody. Yeah, absolutely. But thank you for the question. That's cool. Yeah.
I'm now going for time. We've got a couple more questions. But
Yep, we've got 10 more minutes.
So suggestions for two neurodivergent siblings that push each other's buttons.
Siblings.
Openly know that they like each other and there's physical fighting and name calling.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think siblings is so tricky, right? Because I'm constantly asking myself as a therapist, is what parents telling me about sibling rivalry, is this developmentally appropriate or is it not developmentally appropriate?
Absolutely.
Because a lot of sibling rivalry is really normal and expected, right? Kids use their siblings to work on conflict sort of management, to walk through solution problem solving. So
The
some of that
communication skills,
communication
all of
skills.
that.
So some of that's really age appropriate. But when it gets to be, I imagine, quite like aggressive, or people are getting hurt, or it dysregulates kind of everybody, and then everybody's upset, or like when it starts to get, yeah, absolutely, it'd be that's when kind of maybe something needs to change. I guess again it would depend on the particular situation. I'd love to know more information about this, but
I would just say, like, in that moment, you're dealing with two nervous systems,
absolutely,
and not just one. So you have to be the co-regulator for two nervous systems, or 5 nervous systems, or however many kiddos are in the room.
There's so many nervous systems.
So many nervous systems.
Yeah, and what's really tricky, and I actually had this conversation with a parent early today, is that this parent was saying, you know, what is actually helpful for this child is completely different to what's this child needs, and so how can I possibly co-regulate both of them? And again, like, that is really, really tricky, and sometimes you need to pick. I'm just going to, like, you know, support you, and then I'm going to come back and support you, and sometimes you have to make that call in the moment based on safety needs or developmental kind of needs, and that can be really tricky, especially if you're solo parenting in that moment, or you don't have somebody that can support with the other child. So yeah, I think if you're in that position and need some support around that, it'd be really great to talk to a therapist about sort of troubleshooting that situation.
Yeah, but
just like validating that.
Yeah, just know that you're dealing with a couple of nervous systems at once, and that's a lot on you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And final question, any advice on when children's dysregulation results in behaviour that dysregulates their carer?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. So when the kiddo's doing something that in particular is triggering you, probably because it's something in your history and you haven't necessarily totally worked through it.
I think one that I notice this comes up a lot is when kids say mean, horrible things. Like, I hate you, or you're the worst, you know, those sorts of things. And I think if it's hurtful comments, one of the things I often say to parents is, like, it's not actually about the words, right? It's about, like, how much distress they're experiencing. And this is the best way, because again, like, they're setting you up to feel like they're feeling, right? And so if they're saying things like, I hate you, and that triggers, and you know that triggers such a strong reaction, what they're actually saying is, my distress is huge right now. And so it's about kind of listening to what they're saying without listening to what they're saying.
And at the same time, it's okay to have that boundary of, I see how distressed you are, but we're going to use respectful language.
Absolutely, yeah. I know that you're angry, but can you tell me in another way?
Yep, show me another way.
Show me another way. Yeah,
lessons from playground.
The deal. Yeah, like it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to hurt people. Yeah, it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to be aggressive. And that's a really important difference as well. Yeah.
I had one. It was probably sort of one for, you know, the parent therapist meeting that went ahead many months ago. Children seeking constant parental engagement, like constant need for feedback, and
of any description, positive, negative, as long as it's constant.
It's so our eldest, Jade knows very well. It's sweet and lovely, and you feel awful because it's driving you utterly up the wall.
Yeah,
she's just being so lovely and so effusive, and you know, like, she could be sort of singing the praises of, you know, like a character in a Harry Potter novel at the most inappropriate time when we're desperately trying to get out of the house, or, you know, at the end of the day when we're frazzled, we're running around trying to get dinner ready, everything like that. And it's quite constant. And she's of an age now where we can sort of calmly talk with her about, you know, how it may not be appropriate, and to sort of, you know, kind of also read the room. We don't say read the room, but, you know, to sort of like try and take note of how mummy and daddy might be sort of looking or feeling, or, you know,
genuinely means nothing.
It just means nothing. It's just, it just doesn't, like, you know, like,
or she went, oh, sorry, and then 20 seconds
it's later just straight back into it, and it's like a constant stream of consciousness, like which never stops.
So again, like, going, if we have this idea of, like, it's this disability of the nervous system, if we're thinking about that PDA kind of profile, that this child's borrowing your nervous system. So again, like constantly asking for co-regulation. Yeah. And so that's why it's happening. And again, like what Bree said before, is that in that moment, her capacity to actually see from your perspective is pretty much not there, right? Like, yeah. And so asking that of her in that moment, it's probably not going to yield the results that you're wanting. Yeah. And again, it's like sometimes that is relentless, and it's about working out some sort of different ways of being able to set a boundary for personal space, but for her to know what the expectations are when that's the case. When I say this word that I need personal space, it means that you can do activities X, Y, Z, and have that really, really clear and explicit beforehand.
If it's not predictable, then it's not safe.
Yeah.
So she needs to know what is going to happen in that moment.
Yeah.
So even doing something like at the end of when you're making dinner and you're frazzled, you put music on that you know helps her emotionally regulate, so that she's got something that's helping her along, that kind of thing.
Unfortunately, the only thing we've found at this point that works predictably well is when she has a screen in front of her.
Screens,
With headphones on, especially with
There's
headphones.
obvious limits that we want to put to that.
understand that.
Yeah.
So that's what we've found that works.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
the stops like
She's
it's so
literally
So screens, you know, the tricky thing is with screens is that for some kids that is legitimately regulating, right? It helps them kind of move up through that fight or flight back to safe and connected. Like for some kids that's helpful, right? In the same way that sometimes when I go home after work, if I've had a particularly kind of taxing day and I don't have any energy left, I will scroll on Instagram for like a long time. And yeah. And that's shutdown. So what it is, that's shutdown for me, right? Like so actually like it can be really helpful. But sometimes for other kids, screen time can be they look like they're calm because there's not much happening on the outside, but on the inside, it's actually really dysregulating, right? If something's not going right in the game they're playing, or if, you know, so it's really hard to know by looking at them actually if it's helpful or not.
Have sort of some stuff like, you know, YouTube kids, you know, Minecraft videos, but he's frequently, and he's an AuDHD, he'll be, you know, like digging out and, you know, getting right into it and, you know, like parallel play. And so, you know, like we sort of feel a little less guilty about
there's something about a child just sitting totally still, staring the screen up close. For quite significant periods of time. It's actually quite hard for me to accept.
I've read theories equating it to sort of, you know, like sort of a hunter-gatherers sort of, you know, coming back from a day, you know, like gathering and hunting, and just staring blankly into the flames.
For sure.
It's quite sort of, you know,
but it is, again, it's like, it's that shutdown. And again, a healthy nervous system uses shutdown, right? So it's, again, it's kind of, it's like working out, it's okay. It becomes a problem when it's getting in the way of other things, right? I am aware of the time. We might have to wrap up for the online people, but for those that are here, we're happy to kind of mill around for a little bit and have a chat. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming along. I hope that you've got something out of this. Obviously, all of your children are very different, and it would, you know, keep having these discussions with the support people that you have in place. But hopefully the underlying theory can help kind of piece together some things for you. Anything else?
I was just going to say, if anyone has ideas of future seminars, we want to do them about once a term. So
screen,
not on screen.
So a teacher, yes. Are you volunteering?
I'm happy that.
So if people have ideas, then hit us up and let us know.
02 and speech. So we want to do more of these. And
next year.
next year. Yeah, we've got it. We're sorted. No, I think, yeah, school one will definitely be, I think,
Yes.
next. Yeah.
Just remind me of OT and speech. Do you guys have a list of care providers, OT, speech, etc., that you guys have heard or know are neuroaffirming?
No, we don't have a list. Of neuroaffirming, but maybe we can have a bit of a chat about it.
Yeah.
But that might be a research that we could develop.
Yeah.
It's just hard to like sometimes people will say they're neuroaffirming and then they're not. And
I know there's a resource being generated for psychologists.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Queensland,
Sweet. Yeah, yeah.
You have to pay to register as a neuroaffirming.
That's
Yeah.
yeah, okay. We'll take it on board and we'll see if we can find something even or put together a bit of a list of other service providers. Yeah. Okay, cool.
All right.
All right.
So
well, we might say goodbye to the people.
We'll do it for you. That's fine.
Okay. All right. All right. We'll see you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.